The adoption of the Kenyan Constitution 2010 brought with it a lot of hope. Hope for a better life and better protection of basic human rights. Within this new charter, in Article 43 on economic and social rights, every Kenyan has the right to accessible and adequate housing.
Majority of the people, particularly in the urban areas, are not properly housed. They are living in what are called informal settlements because they are not planned. They don't have the services that are required, such as water, sewerage, roads, electricity.
Access to proper housing is a key pillar in the social development of the nation, but ironically,
when you come to look at the land mass of Nairobi, majority or most of the land is occupied by low-density settlements, which are then, these low-density settlements have an inverse relationship, of course, in terms of the numbers of people to the land occupied. When you look at the high density, it is again a very high population on very small land.
This 90% of Nairobi residents live in crowded and substandard housing that pose a risk to the security of those who live in such settlements. According to an Oxfam report, the informal settlements occupy a mere 5% of the total residential land of the city, despite housing over half of the city's population. While a high-income area such as Karen or Parklands can have population densities as low as 4 or 25 persons per hectare, respectively. In Kibera, population density has been recorded as 826 persons per hectare. There is a glaring and dire need to improve housing standards among the urban poor in order to protect the lives of the millions living in informal settlements. Earlier this year, about 5 people died and several others were injured during a mudslide in Mathari's 4A area.
Hapa inasemekana ni nyumba karibu nyumba 8. Na hizi nyumba 8 haziwezi kosa watu na haziwezi kosa watoto.
Hao watu wafanye nini? Waangalie jinsi ambapo wanaweza kutoa hii mawe. Angalau kuna wengine wamezikwa hapa na mawe. Sababu hii kitu ilianza saa 10.
But because of the maze-like alleys, it was difficult to access the scene and it took hours for rescue workers to get to the victims. These factors have in the recent months caused a lot of distress to residents of informal settlements. And the tragedies are often followed by protests and demonstrations. Access aside, the lack of proper housing means lack of proper sanitation facilities, which expose residents of these areas to health risks. Each latrine in such areas is said to serve at least 500 people a day. In turn, these facilities choke with waste faster than they can get emptied. And the use of these facilities are not free. In some areas, you will find that cartels have taken over the latrines and are charging residents 10 to 20 shillings to use the facility, and for some who live here, that is too high a price to pay. And therefore, they resort to using plastic bags, better known as flying toilets, or improvise a section of their one-room homes into bathrooms.
Government is expected to prioritize in the best way it can, and when resources are available, to address, to ensure that there is adequacy of housing for the urban poor.
The housing sector basically has been has suffered from inadequate financing all across the sector.
It is more than government financial handicaps that hinder the success of providing proper housing to all. The government has attempted to implement slum upgrading programs, but the success of these programs have not been authenticated, as there are reports of those assigned to such houses subletting and returning to their old homes.
What is more important about rules and regulations is not enforcement, it is compliance. It is acceptability. It is legitimacy.
Like other rights enshrined in the Constitution, it appears Kenyans are still waiting to excel in the realization of decent housing for all. Catherine Omwando, KTN Sunday Night.